Well, welcome everyone to our collaboration with Water, our Sunday morning 4 times a year program. I'm very excited that Jamie Manson's available to join us this morning. Take it away, Mary.
Thanks so much, Honor. Mary Hunt from Water, here with Diane New, and delighted to see everybody this morning. It's a quarterly good time that we enjoy together with our Dignity sisters. I want to thank Honor and Kathleen and Mary Ann Duddy Burke for the continued collegial way in which we operate together. And it really has been one of those seamless collaborations that makes this work so enjoyable. I also want to add a special welcome to Jamie Manson from Water. We're delighted that you're here and appreciate the work that you're doing. So great to have you.
I think this is less of an introduction and more of a welcome home to everybody. Jamie Manson is familiar, and many of us even consider a friend. Jamie earned her MDiv, her Master of Divinity, from Yale with a focus on Catholic theology and sexual ethics. She then went on to serve in 2 New York parishes, directing faith formation and social justice work. And Jamie's perhaps most well known as an award-winning reporter, columnist, and books editor for the National Catholic Reporter. We're very proud to say that when she lived in New York, Jamie was a regular homilist and presider for Dignity New York and facilitated Dignity USA's first ever young adult retreat, helping to shape a cadre of activists and leaders still engaged in various forms of justice work. Now, Jamie serves as president of Catholics for Choice during what is arguably the most crucial moment in that organization's decades of work. And it's in that capacity that she is talking with us today. So Jamie, welcome back to our circle. And thank you so much for helping us understand the complex and troubling issues in reproductive health and justice issues today.
Thanks, Mary Ann. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see so many old friends, which I mean longtime friends, not old, but longtime friends to see so many of you. So thank you. It does feel like coming home. So thank you, Mary Ann. Yeah, this is a complicated subject, especially even in progressive Catholic spaces, the issue of abortion. A lot of the problem is there's no space in our church where we can speak about it. And so it is very stigmatized. And so I'm just thrilled to be, I'm thrilled to be speaking to any and all Catholic communities. Please let folks know that Catholics for Choice, and I in particular am available to give these presentations to any community that is interested, even, church communities, progressive communities, university communities. We're very eager to talk about this. And the fall of Roe v. Wade last June has stimulated more desire and a little bit more courage in some communities to talk about it. Not that this community never had the courage, but there are a lot of progressive Catholics that have been afraid to talk about it. And so we're taking that opportunity, even in this tragedy of losing this fundamental human right, to really engage. And so I'm going to go through quite a bit of content, just sort of top lines, because I really want to have dialogue and answer questions. And so I apologize. There will be, I think, about 25 minutes of content. It will span quite a bit because it is a very, very wide topic, reproductive freedom. Just a quick note about language. I will be saying women and pregnant people. I'd be happy to talk more later about why we're saying that. There are some repro communities that only say pregnant people. I think it's really important to say women and pregnant capable people. The reason is at the core of this issue of bans on abortion rights is misogyny. It really is the core issue. And I think that, when we say pregnant people, we're acknowledging that non-binary and trans people, some are capable of being pregnant. And so not wanting to throw them under the bus or lose their reality as well. I think that, our justice movements have to be as expansive as possible. And so we want to include trans and non-binary people and the fact that they do have reproductive realities as well in this conversation. But for me, I also think it's important to always say women, again, because at the core, it's the misogyny. This is why we're fighting this at its core. Well, bans on abortion rights and abortion access are because of, a deep desire to keep women in their place, really, essentially. And so that is why I'll be using much more expansive language when I talk about this. Sometimes I'll only say women, especially when it has to do with theologies of women that I'm referring to, but we're going to be as expansive as possible in our desire for inclusive justice and noting the intersections of injustice that we all face. So let's see if I can get this PowerPoint going. Let's see, I want to get my slideshow going. Hang on one second. Okay, and then let me try to share the screen. Sorry, I'm very Gen X and I don't know how these things work. If I was a millennial or something, or a Gen Z, we'd already have started, but give me 1 second. Okay, so there's the PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, and then let's do the share, the slideshow. Okay, can everybody see the slideshow? People are good? Okay, great. Let's see if I can move through the slideshow. So now that Roe has fallen, how should progressive Catholics respond? I want to start with, I think it's really important to start with facts. There's so much disinformation that the right wing has put out for 2 decades now about abortion that facts are really, really important, I think. And I think some statistics can actually change opinions and thinking around abortion. So number 1 is abortion is common. Every year, 6.4 million US women get pregnant. Half of those pregnancies are unplanned. 50 to 60% were using contraceptives in the month they got pregnant. I think this is really, really important. 88% of abortions happen within the first 12 weeks of gestation, 88%. So you'll see very often the right wing will pivot immediately and talk about late term abortion, and they use that, to stimulate the imagination and give abortion this horrible, horrible imagery. And the fact is 88% happen in those first 12 weeks. And only 1.3% happen after 21 weeks of gestation. And almost all of the time, those late-term abortions, as the right wing calls them, happen in very, very tragic circumstances. There's a fetal anomaly, there's fetal demise. The pregnant person's life is imperiled because of the pregnancy. Pregnancy is very dangerous. And pregnancy is far more dangerous than abortion is. 4 times more dangerous than abortion is. And so if just in my own orbit in the last year, the women I've known who have been pregnant, every one of them had a complication. And even one of them died at one of the best hospitals in New York City in the last year in a C-section operation. So pregnancy is quite dangerous and very often can be life-threatening. And so those are the cases where you'll have those 1.3% of abortions after 21 weeks gestation. 61% of abortion patients already have 1 child. The majority of women who get abortions are already mothers. 40% of unplanned pregnancies end in abortion. 1 in 4, this is really important for a Catholic audience, 1 in 4 abortion patients is Catholic. So Catholics are having abortions at the same or an even higher rate than the US population. So what I often like to say is abortion is part of the life of the church. Abortion is woven into the fabric of the church. And so you have women who are in the pews, who are giving out the Eucharist on Sunday, who are lecturing, who are washing the priest's dishes and garments, and they are having abortions, and they're hearing in their church bulletins or even from the church pulpit that they are complicit in murder. And that is a spiritual violence against women that we should all be crying out for justice for. And then 1 in 4 US women will actually have an abortion by age 45. 1 in 4 US women. So someone you love has had an abortion. Many, many people you love have had abortions. And so because of the stigma, because of the shame around the issue that has been very, very much fueled and generated by the Catholic Church, we very often don't talk about it. And so those are just some statistics. Oh, and the last one, which is really important. This is a huge right-wing talking point, that abortion harms women psychologically, mentally, spiritually, physically. 95% of women who have had abortions say it was the right choice for them. And they say that 5 years after they've had the abortion. 95% still say 5 years later, it was the right choice for them. Okay. A few more numbers before we move into content. 68% of Catholics did not want to see Roe versus Wade struck down. That's a landslide victory for Catholics supporting abortion rights. That's from the Pew study in 2020. 68% did not want to see Roe struck down last year. These are new numbers we just got from the Public Religion Research Institute. 62% of Catholics think abortion should be legal in all or most cases. I was just at a conference this morning. There was a woman at my table who was not Catholic. She saw my Catholics for Choice badge and she said, "My friend is Catholic. She's pro-choice. She thinks she's alone. I just want her to know that you exist, that your organization exists." I said, "Well, we literally have a brochure called You Are Not Alone," because of this exact issue. I can show it to you, actually. You are not alone. And this is such an important message for Catholics to have, that we made a brochure about it. This is actually a brochure we designed in the last year to support people who are choosing abortion and people who are supporting people who are choosing abortion. They're affirmations. It has some theology, prayers, stories of people who've had abortions. We have a story even from an OBGYN who offers abortion care, because so many Catholics feel alone in their pro-choice values. And they're not. But that's the power of the patriarchy and the power of the anti-choice Catholic movement, is to silence people from either saying that they've had an abortion or saying that they are a pro-choice Catholic. So 62%, we have the majority. 7%, again, new numbers from PRRI, 7%, only 7% of Catholics think abortion should be illegal in all cases. And it's really important to note that that is the official church position, is that no exceptions for abortion, even for the life of the mother, even in cases of sexual assault, no exceptions for abortion. And only 7% of Catholics in the US believe that. So really important, I think, to get all of these facts straight when we talk about abortion. How do we get here? How do we get in this moment where abortion is so fraught in the United States, where it is literally tearing, our country apart, the polarization about this issue, where it's not, in most countries in the world, are not torn apart or over abortion. We are really unique in that. It's not to say that there aren't, throughout Latin America, there aren't very, very, intense and robust struggles for abortion rights, many of them quite successful recently in Argentina, Colombia, Mexico. But in the way it is it's a political litmus test in this country, the way in which it is so polarized that it tears families apart, I think it's a unique situation in the US. And I want to get a little bit into why that is. In the late 1960s, white men got nervous. And they got nervous for reasons you all know well: the Civil Rights Act, the ERA movement, the movement for women's liberation, the movement for women's equality being enshrined in the Constitution, the Stonewall riots, the movement for gay liberation. White men who were previously always in power felt they were losing their power, that this culture of white male Christian dominance was losing its grip with all of these liberation movements. And so they needed a platform, and they needed something that would be very, very compelling to increase, white Christian anxiety, to make white Christians see that things were being taken away from them. And white Christian men particularly were losing their power. And with that, we're going to lose all of our American values. We're going to lose our family values. So these two guys, Paul Weyrich, who people don't know as well as they know the guy on the lower left there, or lower right, Jerry Falwell. They were both really architects of what we know today as the Christian right-wing movement. They thought, let's make religious liberty claims to try to protect our freedom. And so for Falwell in particular, Bob Jones, Christian men like this, they were really animating their white Christian base on segregation and saying, you know what, we have the right. Jerry Falwell wanted to run white only Christian universities and schools. So did Bob Jones. And so this was their rallying cry, was segregation, being, white Christians need segregation. It's what's in the Bible, it's what we deserve. And so that had always been what they used to animate their white Christian base. And it got to the point where the IRS actually threatened the tax exempt status of these white Christian organizations and said, listen, the Civil Rights Act is law. You cannot take our money and continue to have your segregated Christian academies. And so they were like, oh man, we need to pivot. We need to pivot to a new issue. What is it going to be? It also became, by the early 70s, just untenable because it was so blatantly racist that they were struggling to still animate their base and galvanize people on these very blatant racist desires. So they needed to pivot to a new issue. And so they looked to the Catholics. And what they saw, what happened in 1978 was there was a really important midterm election, not unlike the one we just had in November, that was going to be really consequential. And Catholics went to church parking lots and were leafleting parking lots and for anti-choice candidates in these four very contested Senate races. And the Catholics won all of them. All four anti-choice candidates won because of these right-wing Catholic were so successful in their political organizing around the issue of abortion. And Paul Weyrich, this great architect, great in quotes, of the new right, he's the guy that founded the Heritage Foundation, for example. He said he was smitten. He said, these Catholics know what they're doing. Look at how they used abortion. Look at abortion as a respectable issue, unlike the crummy racist platform we were using. Look at abortion. I mean, mothers, babies, it's so compelling, And so there was a very, very deliberate move by white male Christian leaders in the late 1970s to pivot to abortion, away from racism, away from segregation, and into abortion to animate their base. They considered a number of issues, flag burning, gay rights, to animate, but nothing was as compelling as abortion. And so, they borrowed, Catholics had some very compelling language that they began to use around abortion. So, there was this Catholic doctor, John Wilkie, in the late 1970s, who created the handbook, the anti-choice handbook, and he was the guy, through his message testing, who decided rather than saying uterus, we should say womb. Rather than saying fetus, we should say child. Rather than saying woman, we should say mother. So it was all building in this very, very successful messaging and language campaign that the evangelicals took. And they just put the anti-choice movement on steroids, really. And so it's an amazing thing, because throughout most of the 1970s, evangelicals didn't care about abortion. They thought it was a Catholic issue. The Southern Baptist Convention in 1972, 1974, 1976 passed resolutions saying abortion was a choice between a woman and her doctor. Dr. James Dobson, a notorious homophobe, said there's nothing in the Bible that says that, that Christians should be against abortion. So then you see in 1978, 79, around the time that they looked at Reagan to be their candidate, they all pivot to abortion, right? And so Falwell gives his first anti-abortion sermon in 1979. Before that, he had nothing to say about abortion. And Ronald Reagan, who had just in the 60s signed the most liberal abortion laws in his state of California, when he was governor of California, he was very liberal on abortion. Suddenly he becomes anti-abortion, right? Because they see it as so compelling. And Reagan wins, in large part because of the way he used the abortion issue to galvanize Christian white people. And around this issue of fear about loss of really, it was about loss of white male dominance, white male Christian dominance. But they use this what they see respectable issue, compelling issue. So that's why it's such an important part of our political, milieu, is because, and now today you can't be a Republican and be anti-choice. Like, that's how extreme it has gotten. There used to be Republican women for choice. That used to be a thing. That doesn't exist anymore. That disbanded about 5 years ago. It's just become so enmeshed with Republican politics, and now with Christian nationalism and white supremacy, unfortunately. So that's the history that I think is really important, how it became such a political issue. So yeah, as I just said, abortion was used to animate the right-wing base. It gave evangelicals and conservative Catholics a prime seat at the Republican table. So you'll see a lot of photos with Reagan and Paul Weyrich at the table and Jerry Falwell's at the table. And that's all because of the way they manipulated and exploited abortion for political gain and to animate their base. Let's talk for a minute about Catholic teaching. The Catholic teaching, particularly that life begins at conception. Big lie that a lot of conservative Catholics say is that the church has always held that life begins at conception, and abortion, even at the earliest stage, is murder. This is not true. I won't go into why, but there were plenty of theologians throughout Christian history, even Aquinas, even Augustine, who did not believe that life begins at conception and that the destruction of an embryo was murder. They like to claim this now, but the fact is that this did not become official teaching until 1913 with the current canon law that we have, and the Pope didn't declare this until 1867. So this notion that life begins at conception is a new Catholic idea. Pope didn't even say till 1867. It doesn't get codified into canon law until 1913. But the church holds this idea, and it claims that it's an idea based in natural law. Now, we all know, as lesbians, that the natural law is also an ideological problem for us, because these hierarchs all have this idea that natural law, they have a very biological, rigid interpretation about this. So, homosexuality is against God's law of nature because we can't procreate, you've heard all of the laws. It's this very, very fundamentalist notion of nature, and that nature, as they interpret it, being God's plan for humanity, and anything that goes against God's plan for humanity is a violation of God's natural law, right? And so very similar with abortion, but this claim that life begins at conception, so any destruction is, this fertilized egg has a final purpose, and that's to become a baby. And so anything that gets in the way of even this fertilized egg is sin and is death and murder. The problem with this idea that life begins at conception is, first of all, getting pregnant could take up to 2 weeks. Just want to do a quick little biology for you. We think this is important at Catholics for Choice because many of us don't even understand human reproduction, in this country, because there's no sex education in this country. And so it's actually, this is how it happens. The egg is released from the ovary. This fertilization happens when the sperm meets this egg. The fertilized egg travels. It takes days to travel through this fallopian tube. And then pregnancy really can only begin when that fertilized egg is able to implant successfully into the lining of the uterus. So pregnancy is not viable until that implantation happens. And you can't have a positive pregnancy test until that implantation happens. If you're here and they have this traveling, day 1, day 2, you won't get a positive pregnancy test. You'll only get it when that implantation happens, that embedding into the lining of the uterus. That's when pregnancy becomes viable. So here's the problem, is that what the church is saying is that day 0 is when life begins. Well, in the days from day 0 to day 6 to 12, those fertilized eggs, 60 to 80% of those fertilized eggs naturally get washed out of the body. That's just nature, So a lot of fertilized eggs never embed into the uterus, and so it's so important I think for Catholics to understand this, because if it's true that life begins at conception, and this is how God has designed it in nature, well, what does that mean? That 60 to 80% of those fertilized eggs are just, well, murdered, if you believe the church's opinion on this, right? So it's just not even scientifically accurate to make these claims about embryos, because God's own natural process is constructed in such a way that all of this life gets extinguished. So I think I always like to bring out that point, is that even this claim is scientifically absurd. Here it is, 68%. So how does this align with God's plan? That's a big question, I think. And the reason I bring it up, and the reason I think it's important to know about all the, the differences, opinions of theologians throughout church history, is it opens up the possibility of a conversation that we should be able to have in the church that we're not allowed to have. As you know, it is an absolute, you cannot question this teaching. You will be shunned. You will lose your job. You won't get invited to the fun parties with the bishop if you dare to publicly question or even dialogue on the church's position on abortion. I think that the reason it's really important to look at these inaccuracies is it opens up the possibility for questioning that we're not even allowed to do within the walls of our own churches. So how do we at Catholics for Choice make our case for supporting abortion access? We use three parts of the tradition. We use conscience, we use religious freedom, and we use social justice. I'll break these down quickly for you. And again, we're going deep in our own tradition, to make these claims. We have, as I'm sure you all know, the primacy of individual conscience. So this is right from the good old catechism, everybody's favorite book. Oh, hang on, sorry, went back. Conscience is a judgment of reason whereby the human person recognizes the moral quality of a concrete act that they are going to perform, are in the process of performing, or have already completed. In all that they say and do, the human person is obliged to follow faithfully what they know to be just and right. And that's right out of the catechism. Now, the catechism has this as man and him and he. I made the language inclusive for our sanity. But this is right out of the catechism. And, there's been some studies of white Christian evangelical women and white Catholic women. And how do you move the needle? If they're anti-choice, how do you move the needle and get them to start to think more openly about pro-choice values? Catholic women are actually much easier to convince of pro-choice values than evangelical women. And I think this is one of the reasons, is that we have inculcated as Catholics, as people who speak Catholic, as Mary Hunt likes to say, we have this notion of reason, and of reason as God's gift, and the notion of conscience, and that God asks us to do our own moral discernments. I think that's kind of in our bones as Catholics. And so I think that's why it's so much easier to convince Catholic women and move the needle with them than evangelical women who live in a very black and white universe without these very deep, rich traditions and theological ideas. And so that's one of the three guiding principles we use at Catholics for Choice. The other is religious freedom. This is the whole conference I was just at this morning was about religious freedom and separation of church and state. Catholic Church and Vatican II had a whole document on religious freedom and its deep ties with respecting human dignity. But at its core, religious freedom means not only the right and the freedom to practice our religious faith, but the right for us to be free of the religious beliefs of others. And what we're seeing happening with these laws that talk about fetal personhood and fetal rights, or life beginning at conception, is that these are theological ideas. They're actually Catholic ideas that we are now seeing, the Catholic ideas that most Catholics don't agree with, mind you, and we're seeing them getting codified into law. And so what's happening is that Catholic theological ideas are getting written into civil law, and in so doing, are infringing on the religious freedom of others. So Jews, for example, believe abortion should be legal, and that there are many cases for Jews in which abortion is required In the case of the health of a mother, if a mother's life is in imminent danger, Jews require abortion. Jews do not believe in burying fetal remains. There are some states now where there are laws that you have to bury fetal remains if you had a miscarriage or abortion or whatever happened. And the rights of Jews, the rights of Muslims, the rights of mainline Protestants, all of whom think differently about abortion than Catholics do, are being completely infringed upon and eroded with this writing, this codifying of Catholic theological ideas into civil law. That's why we're seeing weird things like threats to contraceptives happening, because Catholics, these right-wing Catholics, these hierarchs think that birth control pills, for example, are abortifacient, that they induce abortion. Is this scientifically accurate? No, but Catholics think so. So we're going to codify it into civil law. That's why Catholics are opposed to all reproductive technologies. Any kind of in vitro fertilization, totally opposed by the Catholic Church. That's why you're seeing threats to in vitro fertilization now being codified into law, or bills being proposed. Again, Catholic theological ideas being codified into civil law and eroding religious freedom for everyone. The last one is the Catholic social justice tradition. There's our friend Pope Francis. What you all know this as well as I do, if not better, that we're supposed to have a preferential option for the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. And the fact is, abortion bans and restrictions, who do they disproportionately impact? People of color who are already suffering from systemic racism, people who are poor, who are facing enormous economic injustice, people who are immigrants, especially immigrants who are finding themselves in detention, people who are in rural areas, people who are in situations of domestic violence. These are all the people who are already suffering. Their suffering is just exacerbated by these abortion bans and restrictions, because the fact is, privileged people, white women who are wealthy and privileged, they will find a way, to have an abortion. They'll travel to California, they'll travel to New York, or whatever they need to do. They'll have the money. It's always the poor. It's always people who are vulnerable and being, crucified by horrible structures of injustice that will always suffer the most. So the very people that the Catholic Church calls us to prioritize are the people who are suffering the most when abortion bans and restrictions are put into law. I wanted to talk to you quickly about reproductive justice. Sometimes you'll hear reproductive justice kind of thrown around. It's a very specific term that I just want to talk to you about quickly. This is an ethical framework that was developed by 12 Black women in 1994. They were at a conference with the Clinton administration on healthcare when there was, this tremendous drive led by Hillary Clinton to get us, the right to healthcare. And they were concerned at what they were hearing. They were hearing talk about abortion that the white people leading those conversations didn't understand the complexity of the Black experience. So they created a whole new framework, and they took reproductive rights out of the rights framework and put it into this much more holistic reproductive justice framework. And it has 3 tenets: the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, and the right to nurture children in safe and healthy environments. So again, it takes the framework of abortion rights out of the realm of choice and takes it into questions of access. Loretta Ross, who's one of the 12 Black women, the founding mothers of reproductive justice, says, what good is choice for women who have no choices? So everything becomes a reproductive justice issue. Guns become a reproductive justice issue because it makes families unable to nurture children in supportive, safe environments. Police brutality is a reproductive justice issue. Tainted water tainted with lead is a reproductive justice issue. So what Black women were saying is, in order to raise children in healthy, safe environments, I need more than just access to abortion. I need all of these conditions. And the reason I think reproductive justice is important is that there are so many overlaps with this framework and Catholic social justice. The concerns of the women who are pushing for reproductive justice are almost identical to the concerns of people who are fighting for Catholic social justice, whether it's about workers' rights or poverty or gun violence or immigrant rights. These are all we're all fighting very similar fights. And so what we've been trying to do at Catholics for Choice is show the mutual strengths of the Catholic social justice and the reproductive justice framework to help Catholics better understand why this access should be part of the Catholic social justice framework, this access to being able to control your own fertility as a fundamental issue of human dignity. The bottom line is forcing someone to give birth is not a moral good. It isn't. And so we think this is reproductive justice is an essential element and should be an essential element of Catholic social justice. To talk more about I want to talk a little bit more about the inequities of what happens when people are not able to have access to abortion care. In 2020, this book, The Turnaway Study, was published by Diana Foster Green. She spent 10 years. She's a researcher at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. 10 years studying 1,000 women. Some of them got access to a wanted abortion and some of them were denied access to a wanted abortion. And so she studied the after effects of the women who got access and the women who didn't get access. And this, I think, is the most compelling argument for Catholic social justice and reproductive justice being integrated into Catholic social justice as I've ever heard. What she found is, and I know the print is a little bit, a little small, and I apologize for that. These are the consequences. For women who received a wanted abortion, they were more likely to set active and aspirational career and life goals. The ones who received an abortion had better physical health, had no short-term or long-term emotional or mental health consequences. The ones who got the abortion were more likely to have wanted children later. This is a very pro-life argument. And when the time is right, they also they were better able to take care of the children that they had. Women who were denied an abortion were more likely to be financially insecure and living in poverty years later, along with their children. If they were denied an abortion, they were likely to have serious physical health problems related to carrying an unwanted pregnancy to term. They reported more anxiety, higher stress, and worse self-esteem in the short term. And those who were denied a wanted abortion were more likely to have trouble bonding with their baby. And their older children had worse developmental and economic outcomes. Their children that they had ended up poorer, ended up less likely to get education. I think the bonding with the baby is really compelling. The numbers are very, very sad. There was the researcher asked women who were denied an abortion, how do you feel when you see your baby smile? And a very high percentage of them said they did not feel happy when they saw their baby smile. I mean, really, really profoundly sad and suffering consequences that happened to women when they were denied wanted abortion. Pardon me, I'm going to go back one second. It is this study, the Turnaway study, that also found that 95% of women, 5 years after their wanted abortion, they got it, did not have any regrets for their decision, 95%. Diana Foster Green was on NPR talking about the book in 2020, and she said something that I found so compelling. She said, abortion is about, there's more at stake in abortion rights than just bodily autonomy and the well-being of a fetus who will become a baby. So she's trying to get us beyond that polarization, as the pro-choice movement talks about bodily autonomy and the anti-choice movement talks about the importance of this, the fetus. What she's saying is it's not just about her body, but her whole life trajectory, her chance of having a wanted baby later, her chance of having a good, positive outcome, romantic relationship, her chance of supporting herself and her family. It affects her existing children and the well-being of her future children. So again, I love the book and I love how it speaks to social justice because it talks about abortion access as being about the totality of a woman's life. It's not just this one choice. The entire trajectory of her life is impacted by this choice. I think one of the things we have to do is make space for moral complexity, for different questions. I think we have to accept that we lost Roe. And I think we have to learn from it. And what can the pro-choice movement learn from the loss of Roe is something that I'm very, very interested in. I think one of the things the pro-choice movement has not done well is make space for moral complexity. And for the fact that for a lot of people, even pro-choice people, abortion is a morally complex issue. And I think that that's something we should welcome, and we should invite people into discerning with us, instead of sort of the gatekeeping that can happen in progressive movements, that if you're not 100% with us, you're out, so there's almost a stigma that happens in the pro-choice movement to people who have questions or who see this as complex. And I think we have to move away from this in this post-Roe world. It's something that Joan Chittister has tried to do. I was very struck. I was at physical therapy on Friday because I had knee surgery, and my physical therapist, who knows nothing about religion, said, "Have you seen that awesome quote by that nun, that meme?" And I was like, oh my God, yes, of course, I know the nun. Yeah. And I had to laugh. So people love this quote by Sister Joan Chittister because she's asking for deeper debate. And I think that that's not, that shouldn't be seen as a stigmatizing thing. She famously said, just because you're opposed to abortion, it doesn't make you pro-life. In many cases, I think your morality is deeply lacking if all you want is a child born, but not a child fed, not a child educated, not a child housed. And why would I think that you don't? Because you don't want any tax money to go there. That's not pro-life, that's pro-birth. We need a much broader conversation on what the morality of pro-life is. And I think that's a great question that we should engage. Even if we consider ourselves very, very pro-choice, I think that these are important questions, about complexity. And I think we should welcome that. Similarly, my esteemed predecessor, Frances Kissling, said something that made her very unpopular in the pro-choice movement years ago. She said the fetus is more visible than ever, and the abortion rights movement needs to accept its existence and its value. It may not have a right to life, but ending the life of a fetus is not morally insignificant. And I really like that quote from Frances, because it again speaks to the complexity of the issue, that for some people, they have to have abortions that they didn't want. And that's a reality. Or even if they choose it, it's not always just, it's not always an easy decision. For some people, it can be an easy decision, and bless them for that. But I think that given, we all have complex histories with pregnancy loss, with seeing premature birth, with stillbirth. Pregnancy is complicated, and every woman has a different experience of pregnancy. And that really colors our imagination around abortion. And I think that we have to admit that and engage it as part of our moral discernment. The last thing I'll say is that we have to shift away from this notion of justification. I think, the starting point right now is, always with the questions about abortion is, should a woman have the abortion or not? Is it justifiable that she should have an abortion? And I think some really good theologians like Rebecca Todd Peters and others are making this argument that we have to move away from that justification framework. The starting point should be the woman, the pregnant person's life, not the termination of the pregnancy. When you listen to anti-choice rhetoric, so often what you'll hear is complete ignore or dismissal of the life of the woman. You never hear about her. You hear about the fetus, and you never think about her. And you see that with these extremists who don't want exceptions in cases of sexual assault, don't want exceptions in the case of the life of the mother. Absolutely places no value, and it's deeply, deeply tied to the fact that we don't see women as valuable. We don't see women as fully human. We don't see women as equal in our society, in our culture. It's deeply, deeply tied to that. Very often, rhetoric around abortion just reduces it to this binary right and wrong. Again, it's inadequate for what is for many people a morally complex issue. And again, what you also often hear in anti-choice rhetoric is that this potential life, this theoretical life, what Rebecca Todd Peters, the theologian, calls a human becoming, not a human being, but a human becoming, that life is always prioritized over the living, breathing woman, the living, breathing person who's at risk. And so we have to start again with the totality of this pregnant person's life. And so, and finally, the last question I think we have to ask, and I ask this a lot for Catholics who think they're not pro-choice. I said, do you trust women to be moral agents capable of making decisions about their lives and their bodies? Do you trust women as capable of being moral agents and making decisions? And if you say yes, you have a pro-choice value. that is a pro-choice value, because that is really the heart of the issue, and you all know, we live in a church that doesn't think women are capable of making decisions, that women are capable of authority. It's why we don't have women priests. Fundamentally, is that we don't think women are equal, and we don't think they're capable of making decisions. And that is so deeply tied to this abortion issue, and thinking that women should not be capable of making these choices, that they're not capable of making these choices. I'm going to stop there. I've been talking long enough to all of you, much longer than I expected. But I want to thank you so much for your attention, and I welcome, whatever questions or reflections you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jamie. I mean, this is just such a compelling presentation, and I love how it just brings us back to the reasons we gather, right? to support, to nurture, to just be so rooted in women's autonomy, ability, and agency all the time, and to trust ourselves and to claim that as Catholic values. So enough for me. I just want to kind of open the floor here. There's so much to discuss, to question. So if folks want to raise hands or wave, if you'd like to say something, please feel free to unmute and go ahead, and let's have some conversation. Mary Jelinek.
Marianne, Jamie, thank you. That was really, really powerful. And I learned a lot, honestly, about biology, among other things that I didn't know. I hesitate to say that, but I did.
That's true.
I think there are a lot of older women in the Catholic Church who are natural allies of the pro-choice movement. I know my mother, for example, said that in the 50s and 60s, all of her friends at one point or another were having D&Cs. And this was just something that they talked about. Everyone accepted it. It was a normal part of life. Large Catholic families stopped at 5 or 6 instead of going for 10 or 11 in many cases. And it was something that I think these older women now are very angry about. They're not talking about it, but I think they're very angry about this loss of Roe.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that we all thought that we had these rights, and that, we would not lose them again. And they were so hard fought for and hard won, and to have the loss. And I think that what's really important is that people see, and it's hard for me to even get the pro-choice movement sometimes to see this, is that the enemy is religious. It's a Catholic agenda. The Catholic bishops invented this agenda in 1967. Obviously, Comstock did in the 1800s, which the Catholic bishops supported. But once state by state in the late 60s, church states began to liberalize their abortion laws. That's the Catholic bishops who created the right to life. It's the Catholics, as I said earlier, that gave evangelicals the idea. So I think that there's certain sense that, of owning that, this is a religious force that's really important, and that this loss of rights came at the hands of Catholic men, Catholic bishops, very wealthy Catholic laymen, and their money, their dark money, and evangelicals, who really push this agenda. And I think that's why I think it's so important for people of faith to speak out, because we've ceded our faith to the right wing, and they claim it now. They've taken religious freedom and run hog wild with it. And so I think it's so important to channel that anger and to embolden and say, as a person of faith, because of my faith, I had this experience, and I believe this access should be legal. Jackie Starkey. Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm just wondering now where we're going with this recent decision or the non-decision by the Supreme Court. And it tends to be a bit more confusing, just in terms of direction and what the possibilities are now for the future. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I had one more slide on that, but I realized I've been going on so long. I said, I'll just talk about it if it comes up. Yeah, I think that, yeah, the mifepristone decision, we dodged a bullet, but, still it's going to be tried for its merits. And, we have a case where a drug that has been legal and safe for 20 years, according to the FDA, suddenly, an activist judge, that was very handpicked by a hate group, which is what the Alliance Defending Freedom is, a Christian hate group, picks this judge, and is able to undermine the FDA, which is the executive branch. It's terrifying. And it just shows that they will stop at nothing. The goal of the right wing is a total abortion ban, a federal ban on abortion. And if they have the House and the Senate and the presidency someday, they will get that, and I think so there will be no sanctuary. There's going to be no California and no New Mexico and no New York. It's really important for people to understand that the gravity of what's happening, and that there will be no sanctuary if they get this, and they will try at nothing. They'll attack misoprostol, the other drug in the abortion drug regimen. And so I think, again, it's important to get really loud as people of faith and say, because again, the Alliance Defending Freedom is a Christian organization, to say, not in the name of my faith can you do these things, and to take back that narrative from the right wing. But also, I think that we need a permanent solution. And the permanent solution is the Equal Rights Amendment. I know this, I'm in a room that's very familiar with this. But the fact is that we ratified all 38 states. You all know about the deadline that was imposed in 1982, which is rubbish. There's no such thing as imposing deadlines on a constitutional amendments. Every other amendment is given as much time as it needs to be ratified. And, I think that until we're fighting these battles, and Roe was vulnerable because it wasn't based in real constitutional equality. And until we have our rights as women, as people of various genders enshrined in the Constitution, we're going to keep fighting these battles, and our rights are going to be vulnerable to whoever's the president, whoever's in Congress. We have to do this piecemeal legislation, trying desperately to protect our rights. And that's because we don't have fundamental constitutional equality. We're the only country in the, in the Western world that doesn't have a gender provision in its constitution. It's absolutely necessary that we fight for this. And so luckily we have two new reps in Congress, Representative Cori Bush and Ayanna Pressley, who have ERA legislation now. It won't pass in this, this Congress, obviously, but it's there now, and that's a good thing. So I think that's really where we have to be, is getting those rights enshrined finally. It's working in the states. New Mexico is a state that has a robust equal rights amendment. In New Mexico, there are no gestational limits on abortion. Abortion is paid for by Medicaid, and even your travel to your abortion is paid by Medicaid. So you can see that's the power of a really robust ERA. The current ERA also protects people of all genders. So it also protects on the basis of sexual orientation. It has the power to protect same-sex marriage, because we know that also is now vulnerable because of the Dobbs decision, because it called into question all those protections that we thought were guaranteed to us in the 14th Amendment that aren't. So I think that's it. That's ultimately we need that permanent solution.
Mary, and then Mary Kay and Donna.
Yeah, thanks. Jamie, thank you so much for this presentation. I echo other people's appreciation for what you've laid out. I have two questions. One is, how do we, or at what point, especially in this very difficult moment, I know this is a hard strategic question, but at what point do we stop reinforcing, even by opposing it, the Vatican's view on abortion, and begin to lay out a Catholic feminist moral theology of abortion? Because we really don't have one. I mean, you mentioned several people. I would go back to Bev Harrison in terms of the Christian tradition, and Rebecca Todd Peters being her successor, but we really don't have that. And I'm just wondering, at what point do we do that? Because it seems to me in the LGBT, and this is related to my second question, in the LGBT world, we are beginning to see Catholic takes, as it were, on LGBT issues, both in terms of sexual morality and in terms of anthropology, and all the questions that go with it. So we're not going back to those same old documents every time and trying to unpack them and to, oppose them and so forth, but people are doing new work. So I'm just wondering how you see that in the context of the strategy that you and others are really tasked with in a very difficult moment.
I think, Mary, we need it. We need it now. We needed it yesterday.
Yeah, I agree.
It's so important. And so we're building actually a theological advisory council at Catholics for Choice, just sort of move ourselves towards that. I'll be writing to you about that shortly. I think that's really what we want to do, is we have to create these theologies, especially since it's our church's fault that this happened. I feel like, and Mary Ann, you and I have talked about this, there's almost a moral obligation among Catholic feminists and liberation thinkers to do this, because it's it's the hierarchy's fault.
Right, and from a strategic point of view, it seems to me that it's a really wonderful long-term strategy, because people are voting with their feet in numbers that we couldn't even have imagined. The article yesterday in the Washington Post about 30% of Latino Catholics or Latinos not continuing in their usual patterns. I mean, that's that was the hope of the Catholic Church. So anyway,
That's right.
Great, glad to hear that, and of course happy to support and whatever I can do.
Thank you so much. Mary Kay?
Hi, good morning. Thank you. I learned a lot too. I took notes.
Oh, good.
My question is, and I have a 90-year-old aunt, my aunt the nun, and I spent a lot of time with her. I'm wondering where the religious women are in this fight, because they're the ones that are in the trenches with the marginalized. They're the ones that have a voice. I understand that many of the religious women are getting older, but my aunt writes letters to every congressman. I think she alone got Janet elected in Wisconsin. She's active.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if you have heard where they're at in this whole discussion. And thank you. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate your being here. I think that's this really important question that I spend a lot of time thinking about women religious. My gut sense is they're with us, but so many women religious are afraid to speak out. They're really afraid. And I think because they're in survival mode at this point. A lot of the communities are aging. They want to take care of them with, in comfort and dignity, which I really, really understand. So I think it's a matter of, some have emboldened themselves. I think 10 Ohio nuns just did an editorial a week or two ago. In Kansas, there were 3 brave nuns that came out during their ballot initiative that was wildly successul. But I would like to embolden women religious more on this issue, and I wish they would be less afraid. Though I understand why they are. What I have had some success doing is giving a version of this presentation to women religious in a very clandestine setting. I did one with a group of nuns that we did at a rec center in the city, because they didn't even want the presentation on their property. Like, that's how deep the fear is. And these are really educated women, who have owned businesses and run, organizations, and we're still so afraid, but wanted to learn. And so, you have organizations like Network that won't touch abortion. Nuns on the Bus won't touch abortion. But at some point, they have to. But I think it's a matter of education. And I think that, part of the horror of, the Catholic silence, stigma, and taboo is that it has kept people from being educated. And so I think that's the key. So if communities of women religious that would want to have this conversation, again, I'm happy to do these things in a clandestine fashion. I don't need to be boasting that I talk to such and such community, do these private listening sessions and things like that, figuring out how they can become emboldened. I think it's really important. The nuns that I did, I'd spent 6 hours with them doing the full Monty of my presentations. And there was a ballot on their state constitution in the election. That's why they called me out there. And we went line by line by the ballot. And they said to me, we didn't know how to vote. And it's shocking because, women religious are so smart and so well educated, and these women knew healthcare and, and so sometimes I think that there's been that lack of information and space for dialogue. So again, really want to say, if you are connected with communities that want to do these conversations, it's a really great way to embolden them, I think.
I wonder if they have such enough energy to focus on their own project, that now this is blowing up so quickly.
Yeah.
And the money that they get for their projects, a lot of them are from the white men
Right.
organizations. And so it's a fine line they have to walk. So,
Exactly.
but I definitely am going to point this out and send her to Water when we get this online, and see if she'll listen to it.
Great. Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. And even if, one thing, if I could get 3 nuns into the White House to talk to President Biden, I think it would be effective. Like, even if you bring women, what I keep saying when I get to talk to women religious is that you have so much more credibility and power than you realize. I think a lot of them don't realize their power and their moral credibility.
Yeah.
People don't listen to bishops. People know, they're utterly corrupt. But they do listen to nuns. And I think Nuns on the Bus is a great example. Everybody knows Nuns on the Bus, Catholic or not, and so they do have power. And I think it's also about owning their power and getting them into the right rooms too.
I think the other aspect of this that we forget about so often is it's not just the legislation or the regulations or whatever that impact folks. All of this rhetoric is, creating so much confusion, right? Even among medical providers, or among fear. And this touches into the women's religious issues, because so many of them run healthcare facilities, and where they're faced with these questions on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of healthcare providers, are really concerned about their own practice and about whether they can give patients advice one day that's going to be legal the next, right? or safe for them to come out. And even, I heard an interview the other day with an OBGYN person saying she doesn't know whether to tell her patients to feel free to order mifepristone, because it could be gone by the time they receive it in the mail, the protections for that. So it's just really impacting people's lives in very fundamental ways, that what the right wing is doing, what our church is responsible for doing in so many ways. I think we really have to grapple with this as a fundamental life and death and issue in so many ways. I mean, this conversation can go on and on and on. Is there anyone else who wants to make, go ahead, Donna?
It's Donna this time.
Yeah, sorry.
Jamie, this is another question, a bigger system question, but we have a legislator in Wisconsin who's introduced a bill that would ban the 2 medical schools from teaching abortion strategies, the whole bit of it. Is that happening in other states?
Well, it's hard to even get abortion education in most medical schools. And I think that that's a thing that people do not know about. I mean, my former partner, who's a medical doctor now, we're still very good friends, lesbian in their superiority. And, she is at a private hospital in Queens, New York, and has got no abortion education at all, and there are states in which doctors have to be certified just to give out mifepristone and misoprostol. I mean, absurd boundaries. And so, I think that's a larger issue of academic freedom that I find terrifying, that you can't teach. I mean, obviously they don't teach it in any Catholic medical school, and there are many in the US, but I think that there's a larger issue of just lack of access to this education and this practice in medical schools. And that goes back to the deep misogyny of medical education, which is profound as well. So I think that's a great question. I'll just say very as quickly as I can, these laws, at some point we're going to have to, I really do believe more courts are not going to save us and lawyers are not going to save us. I think the progressive movement is leaning too much on lawyers at this point. We have to start doing real civil disobedience. I think we have to get the great Christian tradition we saw in the civil rights movement of civil disobedience and start doing it. Whether it means a bunch of, faith leaders shutting down the FDA, if it comes to it, if the FDA decides to fold to this absurd, court thing that's going on. I think that that's what's going to have. We have to start challenging the laws directly, with our bodies, I think at some point. Because they'll throw anything at the wall and see if it'll stick. And I think we're at the danger of normalizing what's happening with laws like this, like you're saying with the medical education or the mifepristone. And that's what happens, I think, when fascism, is that it starts to make things seem normal. And we have to start saying this is not normal. And we've really got to start challenging these laws directly and breaking these laws directly. Mifepristone is very affordable. There are pharmacies in India desperate to sell it to us at cost. They're very cheap. I think it's great. States are stockpiling them now. It's the right thing to do. We just cannot pretend that these laws are, just because it's a law doesn't mean it's just or it's moral. And at some point, we're going to have to start breaking these laws.
Okay, well, sign us up. And go ahead, Kathy, and then we'll wrap.
But I was, I'm burning inside because in the 70s, when I had 2 young children, I was so pro-choice and nobody would listen to me then. And I think the main thing we have to do is educate females. The females, how could anybody back this? If they saw your presentation today that says you're not allowed to take care of your own body, when during COVID, they wouldn't wear masks and their bodies with their own domain, they wouldn't get vaccines and all this stuff. And they're going to tell you have to follow through. We just need education so badly for women. It's so crazy. And back then, I was even going to the Catholic Church. That's before I got enlightened. And I was like, it's just as fresh now, over 50 years later. It is driving me nuts that if a girl saw your presentation today and saw how demeaning it is, I think that's the only thing that would ever change them, to be educated about it, all the things and the background that you gave was incredible.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think education is really key, especially among faith communities. So anyone else you'd like, I have a whole suite of presentations I can give. And
Yep.
we have our
Visit the Catholics for Choice website, be on their Facebook page, be on their Instagram, Twitter, follow it. The booklets Jamie mentioned, they have great publications. Most are available in Spanish as well as in English, or many are available.
Yeah.
Spanish and English. There are, Jamie's doing these kinds of talks all the time. I think one of the most significant things that we can do right now is be supporting Catholics for Choice as we move forward and spreading the word. And yes, when this recording is made available, please do share it with others who need to see it. So Jamie, thank you so much for being back with us. My guess is it's likely we'll have to have you back again, and we'll delight in doing that and going, to the next level or the next major issues that come up. Thank you, everybody.